Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories.
This whole thing started because folks from the city think they know better than us country people. They move out here, buy up some land, and then act surprised when there's, farming going on. I've got 500 acres, mostly hay, alfalfa, and oats. Good stuff for animal feed. After my wife passed, and with no kids to take over, it just made sense to keep things simple with the farming. Sometimes I bring in extra hands, especially around harvest, but mostly it's just me. I've had developers sniffing around for years, trying to buy me out, but I never sold. This land has been in my family for generations, and it's staying that way. Then this HOA development popped up right next to my farm. It's got all these cookie-cutter houses, each one looking exactly like the last, squeezed in like sardines. Between my property line and theirs, there's this narrow strip, barely an alleyway, maybe 12 feet wide. It seems insignificant at first, but it became a real battleground later on. This new HOA brought with it a new president, a woman named Martha. I swear, Karen would have been a more fitting title for her. From the moment she moved in, she was on my case. First, it was my tractors. Mr. Mason, she'd start, her voice all pinched and tight. Your machinery is incredibly loud, and it disrupts the peace of our community. I just looked at her, blinked slowly. Martha, I said, this is a farm. Tractors make noise. It's kind of how farming works. She'd huff and puff, her face getting redder by the minute. Then it was my chickens. And those chickens, she shrieked one morning, practically vibrating with indignation. They squawk incessantly. It's a health hazard. And the smell, my co-op was spotless, and my chickens were happy as clams. I had about 50 of them in a big, clean co-op with plenty of outdoor space. Plus a couple of cows, a couple of pigs, nothing you'd call a massive livestock operation. Just enough to keep things interesting and provide for myself. But to Martha, they were a plague. And the color of my barn? Offensive, she called it. It's a perfectly good, traditional red barn, but apparently it clashed with the beige and taupe palette of her subdivision. I tried to be reasonable at first. I explained to her, politely, that I was here long before her development, and that agricultural operations are protected in this county. I told her I wasn't subject to her HOA's rules. But Martha, she just wouldn't listen. She started sending me official-looking letters, stamped with the HOA logo, demanding I cease and desist various violations. Then came the fines. Real, actual fines, attached to these ridiculous demands. I crumpled up the first one and tossed it in the trash. The second one, I just chuckled. But by the third, I realized she was serious. That's when I called my lawyer, Old Man Henderson. He sent them a very stern cease and desist letter of his own, citing every county ordinance and state law that protected agricultural operations. For a few weeks, things went quiet. I figured she'd finally gotten the message. I was wrong. One Tuesday morning, I was out checking on the fences near the back of my property, and I heard this horrendous grinding and crashing sound. My blood ran cold. I ran around the barn, and there she was, Martha, sitting in a Bobcat machine. I rented one by the looks of it, and she was systematically tearing down my chicken coop. Feathers were flying, wood was splintering, and my poor chickens were squawking like crazy, scattering in every direction. I stood there for a second, just staring, unable to believe what I was seeing. Then a cold fury settled over me. This wasn't just an annoyance anymore. This was destruction of my property. And Martha, in her idiotic rage, had left the Bobcat parked right in her driveway when she was done, like she was proud of her handiwork. What Martha didn't know was that I'm a bit of a tech enthusiast. I've got cameras everywhere, not just around the house, but even out in the hayfields. I told myself it was for security. What if a wolf comes down and tries to take a newborn calf? Even though we haven't had a wolf sighting around here in over 50 years. But that day, those cameras proved their worth. I had the whole thing on video. Martha, driving that Bobcat, smashing through my fence, demolishing my co-op. I called the sheriff, and within an hour, 2 deputies were standing in her driveway, looking at the Bobcat, then at my demolished co-op, then at the video on my phone. Martha tried to bluster, to deny everything, but the evidence was undeniable. She was arrested right there on her manicured lawn for property destruction. She ended up taking a plea deal, paid a bunch of fines, and had to fork over a good chunk of money to cover the cost of rebuilding my co-op and replacing my chickens. But even with all that, I wasn't satisfied. She got off too easy. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The war had just begun, and I knew exactly where to start. I rebuilt my chicken coop, but not in the same spot. Before, it was a little closer to Martha's house. This time, I put it much further away, and instead, I built something else right up against that fence, directly across from her back patio. A massive pig pen. I went out and got 24 pigs. Big ones. And wouldn't you know it, most of the time, the wind around here blows straight from my new pig pen, right into Martha's pristine subdivision. I could practically hear the squeals of the pigs and the future shrieks of Martha. This was just the beginning of my long, sweet revenge. The pigs were a masterpiece. 24 of them, mostly Berkshires and Duricks, all growing fast, all doing what pigs do best: eating, sleeping, and creating a fragrance. And like I planned, that good old country wind carried it straight over Martha's subdivision. Within a week, the phone calls started. Not from Martha directly, but from other residents in the HOA. "Mr. Mason, this is Brenda from 1422 Sycamore Lane," one woman sputtered, her voice high-pitched and strained. "The smell from your property it's unbearable. We can't even have our windows open." I chuckled softly. "Brenda, is it? Well, I'm a farmer, Brenda. And those are pigs. Pigs, by their very nature, tend to smell like pigs. But it's right next to Martha's house," she practically wailed, "and it's affecting everyone. Our property values will plummet." "My property was here long before yours, Brenda," I told her. "And I'm just conducting my agricultural business. Perfectly legal. Have a nice day." I hung up, a satisfied smirk on my face. This was just the warm-up act. Martha, of course, wasn't far behind. She showed up at my fence line one morning, dressed in what looked like an expensive tracksuit, holding a little perfumed handkerchief to her nose. Her face was a shade of purple I hadn't seen since I ran over a particularly ripe plum. "Mason," she shrieked, her voice muffled by the cloth, "what is the meaning of this reeking abomination? You call this farming?" I leaned on my fence post, a wide grin spreading across my face. "Why, Martha, good morning. Just checking on my prize-winning Berkshires. They're getting big, aren't they?" I pointed to a particularly plump sow wallowing happily in the mud. "That one, Bertha, she's got a real personality." Martha took a step back, gagging slightly. "You did this on purpose. After the Bobcat incident, you're doing this to spite me." "Spite you, Martha?" I asked innocently, widening my eyes. "Why? Whatever do you mean?" "I just moved my livestock operation to a more convenient location, closer to the main road for deliveries. You understand. Nothing personal. This is an attack, Mason, an assault on my quality of life," she screamed, dropping the handkerchief in disgust. "The HOA will hear about this. You will be fined. You will be sued." I shrugged. "Already went through all that, Martha. My lawyer assures me my agricultural rights are fully protected. Feel free to try, though. It'll just cost you more money." She glared at me, turned on her heel, and marched back to her pristine house, leaving a trail of indignation in her wake. The fines started again, of course. Ridiculous amounts for odor pollution and unspecified nuisance. Henderson, my lawyer, just laughed when I showed him. He sent another letter, even more strongly worded than the last, basically telling them to go pound sand. The HOA board meetings must have been something to behold. I heard snippets from some of the less enraged residents, tales of Martha screaming about Mason's pigsty and threatening to resign if they didn't do something. One afternoon, a couple of official-looking men in suits, HOA board members, showed up at my gate. They looked uncomfortable, shifting their weight from foot to foot, clearly out of their element. Mr. Mason, one of them, a skinny fellow named Gerald, began, adjusting his tie. "We're here to discuss the situation with your pigs." "Situation?" I asked, leaning out of my truck window. "My pigs are happy, healthy, and growing." "What's the situation?" The other man, a portly fellow named Bob, cleared his throat. "Mr. Mason, the residents are experiencing some distress. The smell, it's quite potent." "Well, gentlemen," I said, starting my engine, "that's what happens when you build houses next to a farm. It smells like a farm. Maybe you should have considered that before you bought into an HOA beside a working farm. Gerald stammered. But there must be something you can do. Move them? Use air fresheners? I stared at him for a long moment, then burst out laughing. Air fresheners for 24 pigs? Gerald, that's a good one. Tell you what, why don't you fellows go tell Martha to move her house? Then my pigs won't bother her. They left, looking even more deflated than when they arrived. I knew Martha was pushing them hard, but they were running into a brick wall. That wall was me and the law. Then the lawsuit started. Martha, or rather, the HOA on her behalf, filed a civil suit against me for nuisance. Henderson was practically giddy. Wyatt, this is a slam dunk, he told me over the phone. They've got no legal leg to stand on. Agricultural protections are ironclad here. We'll countersue for frivolous litigation and legal costs, and we'll clean them out. The first court hearing was a farce. Martha showed up in a designer dress, looking like she was going to a gala, while I wore my cleanest work shirt. Her lawyer, a slick city type, tried to paint me as a malicious farmer, intentionally tormenting their peaceful community. Mr. Mason, isn't it true you moved your pig operation directly adjacent to Ms. Davis's property after a previous dispute? The lawyer asked, trying to sound important. I moved my operation to a more practical location on my farm, I replied calmly. My farm, which has been here for 70 years. Mind you. Martha kept making these dramatic retching sounds in the gallery, covering her nose. The judge, a stoic older woman named Judge Miller, just watched, her expression unreadable. Then Henderson got up. He presented all the county ordinances, the agricultural zoning, the history of my farm. He showed the court documents from the Bobcat incident, how Martha had been found guilty of property destruction. He even brought in an agricultural expert who testified that pigs, indeed, produce odors, and that my operation was well within accepted farming practices. The judge dismissed the nuisance suit faster than a fly could land on a pile of manure, and then she ordered the HOA to pay my legal fees. Martha turned a shade of green this time. I walked out of that courtroom, feeling a victory building inside me. But Martha wasn't done, not by a long shot. The next morning, I found a handwritten letter taped to my gate. It was from Martha, not HOA letterhead, just a scrawled, angry note. This isn't over. Farmer. You just wait. I knew she was going to escalate, but I didn't know how. I couldn't imagine what she'd try next. Martha's handwritten note was taped to my gate, a flimsy piece of paper flapping in the wind, but the threat in her messy handwriting was clear. This isn't over. Farmer. You just wait. I crumpled it up, tossing it into the back of my truck. I knew she was going to escalate, but I couldn't imagine what she'd try next. I figured it would be another lawsuit, maybe something even dumber than the last one, but I was wrong. A few days later, a strange truck started appearing on the easement, the narrow 12-foot wide alleyway between my property and the HOA. It was a big, beat-up white truck, with no company name on it, just some rusty tools rattling in the back. At first, I didn't pay it much mind. Maybe it was some landscapers working on one of the HOA houses. Then I noticed what they were doing. They weren't landscaping. They were digging, right on the edge of the easement, right where it bordered my property. They dug a trench, a pretty deep one, about 3 feet wide. And it ran the entire length of the alleyway, from the road all the way back to the fence line separating my pigs from Martha's house. I walked over, leaning on the fence. A scruffy-looking guy with a cigarette hanging out of his mouth looked up at me. What exactly are you fellas doing? I asked. He grunted. Drainage ditch. HOA's orders. Drainage ditch. I scoffed. There's no flooding here. Never has been. He just shrugged, took a long drag from his cigarette. Just doing what I'm told, buddy. Gotta clear out all that agricultural runoff. He eyed my pig pen with a smirk. I knew right then what this was. Martha was trying to dry out my pig pen, hoping to make it less odoriferous. Or, more likely, she was hoping the county would see a dry, dusty pig pen and think it was a health hazard in a different way. It was a desperate, sneaky move. I called Henderson. They're digging a ditch. A drainage ditch, I explained. It's clearly meant to mess with my pig pen. Henderson hummed. Is it on your property? Wyatt. No, it's on the easement, I said. But it's right up against my line. He said. Easements are tricky. They might have a right to put a ditch there if they can prove a legitimate drainage need, even if it's a stretch. But if it intentionally interferes with your agricultural operations, that's another matter. Let me look into the county regulations on easements and drainage near agricultural zones. In the meantime, document everything. So, I did. I pulled out my drone and got aerial footage of the trench, showing how it perfectly mirrored my pigpen's length. I took pictures of the workers, of the soil they were digging up, and of the dry, dusty conditions of the area. Martha, I noted, would stand at her back window, watching the progress, sometimes even waving to the workers. She looked smug. The digging continued for days. Then they started laying pipe in the trench, big perforated pipes, the kind meant to drain water away. It was clear they intended for any moisture from my pigpen to flow directly into this new system and off somewhere else. This wasn't just about smell anymore. This was about actively altering the conditions of my farm. One afternoon, as I was watching them work, Martha herself came out, holding a glass of iced tea, looking triumphant. "Enjoying the show, Mason?" she called out, her voice dripping with sickly sweetness. "Oh, I am, Martha," I called back. "Always impressed by how much money you're willing to waste on a losing battle." Her smile wavered. "This isn't a losing battle, farmer. This is called progress. Soon, your facilities will be much drier and less impactful on our community." "Impactful?" I laughed. "Martha, you're digging a ditch that will essentially funnel my farm's natural runoff directly into your HOA's storm drains. Have you thought about what happens when that runoff is pig waste? Because that's what's going to happen. You're effectively contaminating your own water system." Her eyes widened slightly, and her smile vanished. The workers paused, looking at each other nervously. She hadn't thought of that. Of course, she hadn't. She only thought about what annoyed her. "You're bluffing." She sputtered, but there was a hint of uncertainty in her voice. "Am I?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "We'll see. You just keep digging." "Martha, you're doing my job for me." I walked away, leaving her standing there, the realization slowly dawning on her face. A few days later, Henderson called me. "Wyatt, I've got good news and bad news." He said, "The bad news is, technically, the HOA does have the right to install a drainage system on that easement, assuming it's for a legitimate community purpose. They got a permit for stormwater management from the county." My heart sank. "So they win." "Not so fast," Henderson continued. "The good news is, if that drainage system directly interferes with your agricultural operations, particularly if it removes necessary moisture from your livestock areas, or if it contaminates their own system with agricultural runoff, then they are in violation of multiple environmental and agricultural protection statutes. I've already sent a letter to the county's Environmental Protection Agency and the Agricultural Board, outlining my concerns about potential groundwater contamination and disruption of a working farm. I also sent a copy to the HOA board, with a rather pointed legal opinion about their liability if this proceeds as planned." I grinned. "So what happens now?" "Well, they either stop digging and fill in the ditch, or they risk serious fines from the county and a whole new, much bigger lawsuit from us," Henderson said. "One that'll make their last one look like a parking ticket. And this time, it won't just be about money. There could be real legal trouble for the board members if they're found to be knowingly violating environmental regulations. I've heard through the grapevine that some of the other board members are starting to get cold feet about Martha's increasingly aggressive tactics. This might just be the straw that breaks the camel's back." I imagined Martha's reaction when she got that letter. It wouldn't be pretty. The next morning, I drove out to the easement. The truck was gone. The workers were gone. The ditch was still there. Pipes still in it, but nobody was working. It stayed like that for a week. The ditch, a gaping wound in the earth, just sat there, unfinished. I almost felt bad for the mosquitoes. I figured Martha had finally backed down. But then, one evening, I saw something truly bizarre. A small, unmarked truck, different from the first, pulled up to the ditch. Two men, heavily bundled up even though it wasn't cold, got out. They started pouring something into the pipes. It looked like some kind of thick, gray liquid. They didn't use any heavy machinery, just big buckets. They were working under the cover of darkness, quickly and quietly. I couldn't tell what it was, but a cold chill ran down my spine. This wasn't about drainage anymore. This was something else entirely. The sight of those two men, pouring that strange, gray liquid into the pipes under the cover of darkness, gave me a bad feeling. This wasn't just about drainage. This was something secretive, something more sinister. The next morning, the ditch was still there, but the pipes were filled with that concrete-looking stuff. They had effectively sealed off the drainage system. Why would they go through all that trouble to dig a ditch, only to fill it up? My answer came a few days later, not from Martha, but from a county inspector. He showed up at my farm unannounced, looking grim. "Mr. Mason, I'm here regarding a complaint about a collapsed culvert on the HOA property, specifically along that easement. We've also received reports of an unusual odor." I feigned ignorance. "Collapsed culvert? Unusual odor? My pigs smell like pigs." "Sir, always have." He pulled out a clipboard. "Yes, well, the complaint states that a new drainage ditch was installed, and it seems to have compromised the existing culvert system further down the line. And now there's standing water and something blocking the flow, causing quite a backup." It clicked. Martha hadn't filled the ditch to give up. She'd filled it to cause an obstruction further down the line, hoping to create a different kind of nuisance for me. A flood, maybe, or an actual health hazard she could blame on my pigs. But in her haste, or perhaps her sheer lack of understanding of basic plumbing, she'd somehow managed to block the HOA's own stormwater system. She was so focused on hurting me, she'd tripped over her own feet. The gray liquid wasn't just to fill the pipe, it was to solidify something, create a blockage, perhaps make it look like a natural collapse. "Well, I can tell you I didn't touch their culvert, sir," I stated. "My operations are entirely contained on my side of the property line. But if there's a blockage on their side, perhaps you should look at who was digging a trench there just last week." I pointed towards the now-filled ditch. The inspector's eyes narrowed. He made a note on his clipboard and then headed towards the HOA side of the easement. I knew he'd find the gray, hardened mess in those pipes, and it wouldn't take a genius to connect it to the recent digging. Later that afternoon, a flurry of activity erupted in the HOA development. Engineers, county vehicles, and even a couple of news vans showed up. Turns out, Martha's little sabotage project had indeed caused a massive backup in the HOA's stormwater system. Several basements in the lower-lying houses were now flooded with stagnant, foul-smelling water. And a big part of the HOA's common green space was turning into a muddy, smelly swamp. Henderson called me, barely containing his laughter. "Wyatt, you won't believe this." Martha tried to pull a fast one. She hired some fly-by-night contractors to pour quick-setting concrete into a section of the HOA's own stormwater pipes, hoping to create a blockage that would redirect water onto your land or cause some other issue. But she miscalculated. She blocked the main line instead. The county is furious. And the residents? They're beside themselves. "So what does this mean for Martha?" I asked, a grin stretching across my face. "It means major legal trouble," Henderson said, his voice serious now. "This isn't just civil nuisance anymore. This is criminal mischief, potential environmental violations, and a massive liability for the HOA. The residents whose homes are flooded are already talking about a class action lawsuit against the HOA board, and Martha specifically, for gross negligence and willful misconduct. I've heard rumors that the board is trying to distance themselves from her, saying she acted alone, without their authorization. Which, knowing Martha, is entirely believable. The next few weeks were a spectacle. The HOA became a war zone, but not against me. It was internal. Trucks with giant pumps were there day and night, trying to clear the flooded areas. Residents were screaming at Martha during emergency HOA meetings, demanding her resignation. I saw her once, through my binoculars, her face pale and drawn, trying to argue with a group of angry homeowners who looked ready to string her up. Then came the news that Martha had officially resigned as HOA president. Not just resigned, but the entire HOA board had voted to remove her from any and all positions within the community, stripping her of all privileges. They even sent out a general email to all residents, basically throwing her under the bus, stating her unilateral and unauthorized actions had led to the current crisis. The final blow came when I received an official letter from the county. Due to the significant costs incurred by the county in managing the flooding and the damage to public infrastructure caused by the HOA's actions, specifically Martha's actions, and given the overwhelming evidence of Martha's history of harassment and illegal actions against a protected agricultural operation, the county was initiating legal proceedings to dissolve the HOA's authority over the disputed easement. Furthermore, they were reviewing the initial development permits for the entire subdivision, considering the potential for a full county takeover of the HOA's common areas and infrastructure, especially since the HOA had proven itself incapable of responsible management. Martha didn't just resign from the HOA. She put her house up for sale. The offensive smell of pigs, the constant county trucks, the angry neighbors, the looming lawsuits. It was all too much for her. I saw the "for sale" sign go up, a big, bright yellow one, right in front of her pristine, now slightly water-damaged, house. She left without a word, no dramatic farewells, just a quiet, hurried departure. I heard she moved back to the city, probably to complain about city noises now. My farm remained. My pigs continued to thrive. The easement, though still a little messy from the county's work, was mine again, in spirit if not in legal ownership. The HOA, crippled by debt and eternal strife, faded into a shadow of its former self. There were no happy endings, no grand lessons learned by anyone, just the simple, brutal fact that sometimes, even against organized stupidity, a farmer, his pigs, and a good lawyer can win. Honestly, Martha is just pure distilled delusion. Who moves next to a working farm and then acts shocked that it, operates like a farm? The sheer entitlement of these HOA types is mind-boggling. They think their beige little slice of suburbia gives them the right to dictate how someone else runs their ancestral land. And the nerve to actually drive a Bobcat onto private property? That wasn't just a misstep. That was a calculated act of aggression, born out of pure unadulterated rage because she couldn't get her way. It's not enough that she got a plea deal. She should have faced real time for that. It just goes to show how often these self-appointed mini-dictators get away with borderline criminal behavior because they hide behind their stupid little homeowner associations. Wyatt, you should have pressed for the absolute maximum. She deserved every bit of the hell you brought down on her. Pigs were a stroke of genius, though. Absolute perfection. This whole drainage ditch thing is the most Karen move I've heard in ages. First, she tries to find a farmer for farming, then she gets arrested for property destruction, and then her genius plan is to dig a ditch to dry out a pig pen? Did she even think about what happens when you try to drain a pig pen? Or did she just assume pig waste would magically disappear? The fact that she then tried to sabotage the HOA's own system by pouring concrete into pipes speaks volumes about her intelligence, or lack thereof. This isn't just malicious, it's comically incompetent. It's the kind of overreach that only someone with zero understanding of the real world and an inflated sense of self-importance could come up with. And the HOA board enabling her for so long before finally throwing her under the bus? Spineless. They're just as culpable for allowing that tyrant to run wild for so long. Serves them right, their basements got flooded. I hope Martha gets sued into oblivion. This isn't a story about a farmer versus an HOA. It's a story about common sense versus utter stupidity. Martha and her HOA truly believed they could strong-arm someone who actually owned land and contributed to the local economy. Their entire existence revolves around controlling meaningless aspects of suburban life. And when confronted with reality, a farm, they completely melted down. The Bobcat incident, the pig pen, the ridiculous lawsuits, and finally, flooding their own neighborhood. It's a perfect storm of self-inflicted wounds. The conclusion isn't no happy ending. It's a deeply satisfying end for anyone who's ever had to deal with an HOA despot. Justice served, country style.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share.